Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 2 of season 4 of The Flash, Mixed Signals. And I thought this was a reasonably good episode. It's certainly starting to move things forward. It's just that the main plot with Kilgore I thought was fairly weak. But there is some nice stuff going on with the characters, and like I said, the overall mythology of what's going to be happening this season, I think it took a step in the right direction. So let's just kind of get right into things. Let's start with the whole Kilgore thing. This is a character from the comics. I don't think I've ever read anything with the comic book version, who apparently is like some sort of alien computer virus or something. Again, I don't know anything about this character. Just going on the version we get here. Um, I like how they talk. Okay, they're bringing back the idea that metahumans can be created, which is an idea that popped up in season 1 when we had what was it, Deathbolt, and we never did get who was. It said was in Opal City at the time of the particle accelerator explosion, which in the comic books is actually intended to be set in Maryland. Now, exactly where Central City is kind of left a little ambiguous, but it's sort of always, from what I've been able to tell, kind of heavily implied to be out on the West Coast, or similar to Star City. In fact, I think it's been stated by the creators that they sort of imagine Star City as being somewhere in Northern California. So just kind of in my own head, I sort of imagine Central City probably being somewhere in like Oregon or Washington State. But again, that's just my personal in mind. In the comics, Central City is actually expressly stated to be in Missouri. Make of that what you will. Anyway, the idea that metahumans can be created is certainly an interesting one, and one I was kind of surprised they've taken this long to go back to. Now, whether or not Deathbolt comes from the same place, Deathbolt getting his powers is going to be the same as what's going on here with Kilgore and presumably these 11 other people. Well, that remains to be seen. I'd be kind of disappointed if they just continue to leave that just sort of sitting there on the table. Now, the overall story with what's going on with Deathbolt, I mean, yeah, it's kind of run-of-the-mill, not particularly interesting. But what really gets me about this is like when the fellow Quan goes to talk to his partner, and she's like, isn't terribly concerned, despite the fact that one of her, conspirators is dead and apparently died in a really, really horrible way. And then Kilgore shows up and she starts taunting the guy. It was like, yeah, we stole that thing from you. You were going to screw it all up and you've got no proof of anything. Okay, maybe I missed something here, but to me it sounded like he doesn't have any proof that he was even a part of creating Kilgore, except that there's that whole magazine with the picture of the 4 of them together wearing a t-shirt with Kilgore on it. Okay, so there is literally evidence in Cisco's hands that shows that this guy was indeed involved. And there again, magazine article of the 4 of them, which heavily implies that he is heavily involved. So the idea that they could steal this guy's stuff and sort of say like, no, he didn't have anything to do with this. I mean, that's either I missed something or this is incredibly poor writing. I mean, like, enormous plot hole. What in the world were you thinking? Levels of, wait a minute, you've just enormously contradicted yourself. Now, a certain amount of plot holes, I think, are necessary to be willing to let go occasionally. I mean, I've routinely remarked that one of the things that always gets me about The Flash is that he'll stop and try and talk to the bad guy or whoever's trying to do something bad, instead of just running up behind them and punching him in the back of the head 50 times. Which would be the smart way to do things, especially with people who you know to be incredibly dangerous and violent, and who are almost certainly not going to listen to reason. But if the Flash did that, he would win every fight and the show would be boring. Also, sneaking up behind somebody and punching them in the back of the head 50 times without even, giving giving them the opportunity to surrender is not really keeping in proper superheroic tradition, even if it is a eminently more practical method for dealing with such people. But again, it's comics and it's comic book TV shows, so you kind of have to let certain things go. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about? Yeah. So the subplot, speaking of Cisco with Vixen, I thought this was done okay. I mean, they certainly did have a very cute moment at the end where Cisco is like, okay, I get it, I screwed up, but you're important to me, so let's make a really good memory together. I mean, that was done very nicely. Cisco, when he's on his game, can be pretty good at the romance thing. I mean, it was certainly a very heartfelt gesture, and it was exactly the right thing to do in relationship to what was happening with Gypsy. But what was going on before, where it's sort of like Gypsy's obviously pissed, and Cisco is just completely oblivious to it. It's like, man, I don't claim to be any sort of guru with women, but even I could tell under those circumstances that was like, of course she's mad at you, you idiot. Now, in all fairness to Cisco, he did have some crazy person who was going around who had killed somebody, was attempting to murder other people, which, kind of has to take priority over date night. And to her credit, Gypsy does acknowledge this, but it's sort of just kind of like a throwaway line. You would think that somebody as professional as her would realize, like, hey, this kind of has to take priority between us having a nice dinner together. So I don't know. I thought that was not the best portrayal of Gypsy there. That was kind of disappointing. But those are the only two real hiccups in that area. In terms of the emotional reaction and the chemistry between Cisco and Gypsy, I thought that all went pretty well. These two definitely do have a really nice chemistry together, and it is an enjoyable relationship to watch. Nothing really particular to say about Caitlin this episode, just sort of we do get a nice little reminder that she's still struggling with the whole Killer Frost situation. Okay, well, an unimportant message from my phone. Apologies. I did kind of get a kick out of the scenes with the therapist, but you would think that Barry and I was realize, like, given the nature of what it is we do, we're probably going to have to end up lying to this woman a great deal, and coordinating that between us on the fly is probably not going to go so well. And I do like that Barry does ultimately realize that while he was just trying to be a good boyfriend, him not consulting Iris on some pretty important stuff was pretty insensitive of him, and that this was really him trying to sort of step back in and act like the last 6 months had never happened was a pretty foolish thing. But what really gets me about all of this is at the end where Iris basically says, like, Barry, how could you leave me? Iris, were you not there? You know exactly why Barry had to leave, and then treating this like it was some sort of choice that he made. I mean, okay, yes, in the technical sense it was a choice, but, Speed Force going nuts is not good. I don't know. I thought that really spoke poorly for Iris as a character. That she would somehow have resentment for Barry making what she knew was a necessary sacrifice where he really did not have another option. So, yeah. Yeah, why is she mad at Barry? Why not be mad at the Speed Force? That makes a lot more sense. But, okay. Let's see. What else do we have to talk about this episode? Nothing really particular to say about Wally this episode. Nothing particular to say about Joe. I guess maybe that does kind of sum up everything. I mean, it was certainly a solid episode. Again, nothing particular to say about the Thinker this episode. It's certainly interesting to sort of see that little bit more information in regards to his ultimate plans, and the Kilgore somehow factors into it. Um, and someone like the Thinker is an interesting possibility as a source for people with meta powers who were not around during the particle accelerator explosion. Oh yeah, one other thing, I do have to point out that like when Cisco gives Barry the manual for his new suit, Barry can read at super speed, but he does not take even 5 seconds to look at it, despite this obviously being something really important. And all these potential gadgets and stuff in the suit, it is sort of a shame that it doesn't look like those are going to stick around. I mean, granted, the Flash doesn't really need a high-tech suit, but a few little gadgets here and there, I think would actually make a great deal of sense, particularly with someone like Barry's and science background, and could potentially be pretty interesting. I mean, like those little visor things, that makes sense and could potentially be quite cool. Not really sure why Barry needed an Iron Man blaster and the inflating thing. That's funny, and I can't help but wonder if they're going to set something up with the oxygen tank. But I guess we'll have to see. Otherwise, I think that kind of covers everything that I had to say about this episode. So I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.